Night lay heavy over Jerusalem, a sky without moon, the kind that made every cooking fire look like a signal. Along the north wall, men leaned over crenellations and listened to the dull thud of rams and the low chant of soldiers beyond the siege mounds. The engines had been working for months. Stone dust drifted like flour with each strike. In the streets below, people moved with the slow care of the starved, hugging shadows to avoid the palace guards who still swept through at night. You could smell the city from the gate. Tallow smoke, privies ignored, the sour reek of empty pots boiled dry. Near the valley gate, a mother cracked a clay jar and licked the last grain of barley from the shards. In the palace, King Zedekiah stood by a shutter and watched sparks rise where the Babylonians burned their fallen timbers for light. It had not started with engines. It started with a promise Zedekiah could not keep. In the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, after his armies had already hauled away a king and the best craftsmen in an earlier deportation, Zedekiah took an oath before God in Babylon to serve as vassal. He was 21, weak where he needed to be stubborn, and stubborn where he needed to bend. Priests told him God would never abandon his house. Courtiers whispered that Egypt would come. Prophets argued in the marketplace and at the temple gate. One man, Jeremiah, said surrender would save lives. He said the yoke was real and resisting it would break the city. The king hated the words and feared them, and tried to smother both with hope. When he pulled away from Babylon, the answer arrived in winter. In the 9th year of Zedekiah, in the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar came with armies from every people he ruled. Earthworks rose like a second ring of hills around the city, ramps of rubble and timber, platforms for archers, machines that threw stones, towers rolled on wheels so their eyes were level with men on the wall. The Chaldeans cut the roads and took the wells. The Benjamite countryside emptied into the city by the thousands. The siege was a slow vice. It tightened with method, not rage. In spring, a rumor surged up from the Negev that Pharaoh's army had left the Nile. The Babylonians broke camp to meet it, and the city breathed once. Zedekiah took counsel in rooms that smelled of wax and sweat, and made himself believe the reprieve was more than a pause. Jeremiah said it would come to nothing, and when the Egyptians turned back, the Chaldean engines rolled forward again. From the walls you could see the trenches they dug to anchor the rams, the gang frames that swung like metronomes, the rope crews who never tired because replacements were always at hand. Food ran out before hope did. Shops closed because there was nothing behind the shutters. Milling stones went still. Mothers traded ornaments for loaves until there were no ornaments, then traded labor for wheat that never arrived. A boy named Mattaniah stole a pigeon from a snare and ate it raw rather than risk the fire. He hid the bones for soup and cracked them later for marrow that wasn't there. In the upper city, men cut leather straps into thin strips and boiled them until they softened enough to chew. The temple service shortened because priests fainted at steps they had taken since youth without thinking. Perfume could not mask what the city had become. The king asked again about surrender, and his counselors shook their heads. They told him the Babylonians would blind him, kill his sons, and mock the God of Israel. They said to wait, that something would change. Jeremiah said nothing would change except the number of dead. Twice the king sent for him in secret. Twice he was given the same answer: go out to the Chaldean commanders, give yourself up, and you will live. The city will burn if you do not. Zedekiah dismissed him gently, like a man sending away a doctor whose medicine was bitter and sure. In the 11th year of Zedekiah, in the 4th month, on the 9th day, the wall was breached. It happened at night, near the middle gate, where the ground lay easiest for a ram to reach. The soldiers on watch saw the last layer of stone shear and fold inward with a sound that was more felt than heard, a bass note that vibrated the teeth. Chaldeans poured through in a single rush and fanned out along the inner streets, shields overlapping, torches set in wall niches to free hands for the work. The Judean guard fell back toward the palace compound and the Temple Mount, fighting by alleys they knew too well to leave willingly. In the lower quarters, doors splintered. Women pulled children under beds. Wheat stores, hidden for months, were found by men who were hungrier and had more knives. The Babylonian commanders sat in state at the middle gate by morning, the way conquerors like to sit when they want to demonstrate that a city is no longer in charge of itself. Nergal-Sharezer and his captains wrote names and measured buildings with their eyes. Zedekiah waited until night and ran. He left by the king's garden through a gate between two walls and fled east toward the Arabah, the desert road that drops to the Jordan plain. A few loyal soldiers went with him, the last ribbon of authority trailing in the dust. At dawn, Chaldean scouts spotted them near Jericho. The king's guard dissolved like foam in a stream bed. Zedekiah was taken, the sons led before him, the sentence carried out the way Jeremiah had said. They killed his boys with blades held level to the eye, so the last thing he would ever see was the end of his house. Then they blinded him and loaded him in chains for the road to Riblah and then farther to Babylon. Back in Jerusalem, a man named Nebuzaradan arrived with orders that sounded like a list on a counting board. Burn the temple, burn the palace, burn every grand house and most of the small ones, pull down the walls. He moved through the city with men who knew fire and carpentry both. Cedar beams, those prized lengths carried up generations earlier for Solomon's work, went up with a deep, resin-thick roar that reached even into courtyards where families sat stunned with a single round of bread left between them. Bronze fittings were pried from doors. The lampstands were carried down the steps, their weight managed with ropes and curses. Temple vessels went into baskets and then into wagons. The ark had been gone for generations. What was left could still be measured. The outer court filled with smoke until the stones sweated. When the ashes cooled and the last embers were beaten to gray, Nebuzaradan chose who would stay. The very poor were left with vineyards and fields, because empires understand that even devastated ground must feed the garrison. The rest, craftsmen, scribes, soldiers, anyone who could rebuild quickly, were bound for the Euphrates. The road north ran along the ruined villages of Benjamin and past the mounds that had once been watchtowers. Mothers stitched coins into cuffs. Men counted steps without meaning to. A group of priests carried a rolled scroll in a leather case and would not let it out of their sight. At Mizpah, the Babylonians set a governor over those who remained. His name was Gedaliah, a steady man who promised vineyards would bear again. A few months later, zealots murdered him at table. The last fear took the rest of the people south into Egypt, where they would soon learn that refuge can be another name for exile. In Babylon, the exiles learned how to live without a city. They hung harps they had carried out of habit on unfamiliar trees and argued about whether God had abandoned them or followed them with judgment that could yet turn to mercy. Scribes set to work. They gathered the stories and wrote them cleaner than memory. They copied letters to keep the shape of the language sharp. They told one another what the prophets had said when the city still had walls. A letter from Jeremiah reached them with instructions for a long obedience. Build houses, plant gardens, seek the peace of the place where you are. Pray for it, for in its peace you will find your own. They learned to mark time by foreign river levels and by Babylonian feast days that were not their own. They waited. Jerusalem lay open to the sky. Foxes picked their way through what had been the inner court. Smoke-stained stones warmed in the afternoon and cooled too quickly after sunset. Every wind sounded like feet on steps. People walked the ridge from the Mount of Olives and pointed and fell silent when there were no more words. They did not need a prophet to tell them what refusal had cost. They could run their fingers over the scorched edges of foundation blocks and count it. Years later, a scribe would write the dates like knots in a cord: the breach in the 4th month, the burning in the 5th, the fall in the 11th year. He would add what men had seen with their own eyes, that starved boys and old men are equally light to carry, that people can live for a time on hope, and then on memory, and then not at all, and that mercy can arrive where you do not expect it, on a foreign king's decree, or in a letter that says, "Plant a garden anyway." But none of that was visible on the night the wall gave way. There was only firelight on stones, the sound of a king running in sandals he would never see again, and a city learning in the worst way that warnings are not curses when they are true. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.